welcome. In today's video I'm going to be talking through doing a little simple seascape in watercolour for beginners, and I'm doing this on, it's a hot pressed £140 or 300 gram watercolour paper. I will link the paper down below in the description so you can see which one I've used, but just use whatever you've got to hand. And you'll see, to begin with, I do tape these pages down just with some masking tape, which comes off quite easily, just in case it decides to buckle, because obviously it's only ring bound at one end. So if you had a block which was gummed all the way around, you wouldn't need to do that. And then I begin by doing a pencil margin. It's great to have a margin for two reasons. The first reason is it makes it much easier if you do want to go ahead later and get your picture framed. It makes it very easy to mount and frame your picture if you've got that extra margin around it, but also it's quite good to test your colours as well. So I've just done a margin the width of a ruler. And then I'm going to do a very simple drawing using the pencil, and I'm actually pressing on quite hard with the pencil so that the lines will show up to the camera and you can see what I'm doing. But when you do this, you need to make quite light pencil marks, dark enough for you to be able to see them, but light enough for them to sort of disappear once you start with your painting. And you can actually come back later. Once your watercolour is dry, you can come back and erase those pencil lines if you really need to. But quite often you'll find if you do it light enough, they'll just disappear into the background once you start painting. And I did actually measure the horizon. I don't usually when I'm painting, I usually just do it by eye, because obviously your horizon, when you're doing something like a sea, needs to be flat. Water, because of gravity, water lies flat, and you don't want a wonky horizon because your eye will pick that up. So you can use your ruler for that, there's absolutely no problem with that. And then I just put an imaginary headland, some mountains in the distance, and then just an imaginary bit of a bay. And I didn't do anything in the foreground. You could add some more detail in the foreground. You could do some rocks, you could do some waves crashing on those rocks if you wanted to. You can have a play with this idea, do it in different colours, try it on different papers, so either a not pressed, a hot pressed or a rough paper. Using different amounts of water and different colours, you're going to get very different effects. So try doing the same theme over a few times with different papers and things, and you'll find that you develop your own style more. Then you'll find which things you like working with most and which techniques you like working with most, whether you like working wet in wet or wet on dry. So I also used a wax resist on this, so I've actually used a wax oil pastel. You can use any wax crayon, it could be one of the children's Crayolas or something like that, or it could even be just a white candle. White candles are very handy for this kind of thing, and very gently made a little circle for the sun, and then a few little bits in the foreground where the sun might be catching the water. Be very careful when putting your wax resist on, because you cannot remove it. It's very difficult to go back over once you've put it on. Now when it comes to the actual painting, I wet the whole paper first with a nice big wide flat brush. Make sure that you've wet it evenly, you've not got pools. If you put your head to one side and look across, you'll see if you've missed any bits where it's dull and not shiny on the paper. And depending again on your paper, you might want to leave that a few minutes for it to sink in, and you might not want it quite as wet. And again, this is all going to depend on your style as well. So the first colour I'm putting on there is Cobalt, and I cover the whole picture with Cobalt, not forgetting that it's not going to touch where that wax is anyway, so your sun's still going to be preserved. So very watery mix. I wanted it to be quite a light painting, and I didn't want to be fussing about doing lots in the sky. I just wanted to leave that blue, so I just covered the whole thing in Cobalt. The other colours that I'm using today are Viridian, Cadmium Yellow and Alizarin Crimson, and all the greys and greens and violets that I use down the right hand side of the painting are made by mixing the three primaries of Cobalt, Cadmium Yellow and Alizarin. Now, as you come forward in your picture, use more yellow and less blue, and that's going to bring your foreground further to the, to the foreground. Okay, so let me just think what I was going to tell you. Then I had something in mind and I've forgotten. So you'll see that after I put the blue on, I went on straight away with some violety greys for the background hills, whilst it was still wet. And it didn't really matter that it went a little bit into the sky, because that's what hills do in the distance. You see that little hazy depending on the weather. You can see it quite hazy between the sky and the hill there. If you want to, you can leave all that blue to dry completely before you go ahead and put your mountains on, and then you're going to get a crisper line across the top of your mountains. You may want to do more detail in them than I have. You might want to do a little bit of a thicker mix than I have. By the time they dried, I did feel those mountains were a little bit too faint. So when you're doing the mountains, use plenty of red and blue to make it quite a violet grey, but still do add a little bit of the yellow to it. Then, like I said, as you come forward, change those greys, adding less blue and more yellow to make them more greeny yellows in the foreground. And you're going to get that recession then and make those mountains look further away. So you can make so many browns and greys using your 3 primaries. So that's all I'm doing really, just building it up layer on layer. So if you want, let the whole thing dry and do it a layer at a time. You'll see that I use now and again the hairdryer to allow the layers to dry and then come on with the next layer. As I said before, your pencil lines won't show up like this, or they shouldn't do. And what else was I going to tell you? I had something in my mind then. Oh yes, about the water itself. So building things up in layers and letting them dry is pretty good for water, especially when you've got a very flat sea like this. So use your arm and keep it horizontal if you can, and make nice big sweeping marks across the paper. And towards the end of the film, you'll see that I use what we call a dry brush technique. So I use the hairdryer to completely dry the painting, and then I use the side of the brush just to sweep a little bit of paint across, and I allow that to dry out. And it's the same blue mix that I began with, and you'll see you get little flecks then of light, which could be light hitting the water. So have a practice with that on a bit of practice paper. If you've not done it before, put a colour on to your practice paper, allow it to dry completely, fill your brush with another colour or the same colour even to go over the top of that, drag the brush gently across the paper, but let the brush run out of paint and go dry, and then you get these nice effects that could be waves. Actually, mine's not very wavy, mine's a very calm sea, but you could do more movement in your sea if you wanted. So there's a lot of ways you could alter this little picture. Put more detail in the foreground. You could put some rocks and shrubs and things in the foreground, but you could also change the colours dramatically to change the time of day or the season. You can make a beautiful sunset using some reds, more reds than I have in there. All sorts of things you could do with this very, very simple composition. So, you know, do it a few times and have a play with it. Okay, I've got some notes here, and I'm just seeing if I've forgotten to tell you anything. Yeah, so at the end, you'll see that I come on with some pencils, and these are all watercolor pencils. You don't have to do that. You could just carry on working with your paint, work wet on dry to build up some detail. I quite like finishing things off with these watercolor pencils, especially if I'm not particularly happy with the end result. You can sharpen up some lines and you can add depth of colour, but don't cover up your painting. Still allow those colours from beneath to come through. So I've got a very light touch on the pencil. I'm not pressing on very hard at all. I don't want to dent the paper apart from anything else, but very, very gently and in little circular movements almost as well. Just add a touch of colour over your colours that are already there and allow them to come through. So you're adding a bit of detail, a bit of extra colour and depth, but you're not covering up your original painting. But don't feel that you have to use the pencils. That's just something I wanted to do at the end to sharpen up 1 or 2 lines and add some extra interest. There's no need to do it. You can do the whole thing with paint if you wanted to. But for those of you that are interested, you might like to know the colours that I used in the pencils. So those were Prussian blue, deep cadmium, white, golden brown, grey and imperial purple. And those were all various Derwent pencils that I've had kicking around for a while, but they're all watercolour pencils. So you could go on again with your paints when you're using the watercolour ones and disperse them into your paint to make some different techniques. Like I said earlier, at the end you might want to erase your pencil lines. I didn't do, but you could do. But yours shouldn't show through like mine have, because you'll be using a much lighter touch than I did. You'll also notice that the colours I'm putting on at the moment over the top of the sea are still quite thin glazes. Now the thing with these is, because that is a similar consistency to the first wash that I put on, if you did this wet in wet, you'd end up making a mess. So this, you'll see that I did use the hairdryer, so you need to put these glazes on, this sort of technique that I'm doing on the sea at the moment. You need to do that with the initial one underneath being dry. Don't put that, you know, don't put extra. I've never add extra water, always add a thicker mixture if you're working wet into wet. As I've always said in these videos, I'm just giving you ideas. This is obviously not a finished, polished piece by any means. It's not the greatest at the end, but I'm just giving you ideas and techniques and tips for you to go on and spend obviously a lot more time doing a more finished piece than I have time to do here. If you did want to look at my own works, which obviously take me a lot longer than this, if you want to go and have a look at my Instagram page, you'll find me at Lawson Art on Instagram, for those of you that are on there, and that gives you more of an idea of day to day what I'm up to in my own studio with my own work. Like I say, these YouTube videos are just quick little tutorials to get you going, and hopefully for you to pick up some ideas and techniques. Maybe not picking up everything, you might just take away one or two things that you'd not heard of before and that you thought you would give a try to. So hopefully there's a little bit of something for everybody. Do let me know in the comments below if there's anything particular that you want to learn to paint and draw, and I'll try and get on with that as soon as I can. And thank you to everybody who used the community tab the other day to let me know which ones they wanted. And landscapes, like I said last week, came out quite top on that, landscapes and watercolour as well. So I will try and do much more on that. And also there was flowers came out. That was quite a popular subject as well with many of you. But do, if there's anything you want to ask at any time, do ask me, because other people might want to know the answer to that same question as well. And I can answer you in the comments, or I can do a video especially for you. Okay, so let me know how you get on with this little seascape in the comments below, and if you've got any hints and tips for everybody else and want to chat amongst yourselves in the comments below, do that as well, because it's good to know how other people get on. Okay, so don't forget to change the colours, have a few goes with different papers, different colours, and have a bit of a play with a very, very simple, easy composition. And you could go a bit wild with your wax as well. I know I said to be cautious putting it on, but you could make some more waves if you wanted to, and you could have a look at somewhere like Pixabay for some more dramatic seascapes to have a go at. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of the video. I'll pop a little bit of music on for you now, and I'll be back again soon with another tutorial. Bye bye for now.